In the early 20th century, American Christianity was splitting along a sharp internal fault line. On the left stood classical Protestant liberalism, a movement that prioritized social reform and institutional growth, but which critics argued was becoming spiritually hollow and intellectually bankrupt. On the right was American fundamentalism. It was a populist reaction that retreated into cultural isolation, often viewed by the academic world as an anti-intellectual movement driven by raw emotion. For many Protestants, these two extremes created an intellectual vacuum. They felt abandoned by the institutionalism of the left and the isolationism of the right, leaving the broad middle of American church life without a coherent way to engage with the world. Neo-Orthodoxy emerged to fill this space. This movement brought a rigorous, Reformation-based framework from Europe that allowed the Church to maintain its biblical roots while grappling directly with the challenges of modern politics and social construction. H. Richard Niebuhr became a champion of this approach. His landmark study, Christ and Culture, provided the categories needed to understand these conflicting loyalties. Niebuhr recognized that the Church needed a structural framework to categorize its relationship with society, a map to diagnose exactly where faith and human culture intersect. To build this map, Niebuhr defines two core realities. First is Christ, not simply as a moral teacher, but as the incarnate Lord of history bringing a transcendent kingdom to earth. The second reality is culture, the social structures and realities that human beings impose upon the natural world. This includes everything from our political and scientific systems to our architecture, language, and the arts. By testing Niebuhr's sociological models against history, we can see how these two spheres interact and why the most extreme configurations ultimately fail. The challenge is navigating these simultaneous, often conflicting allegiances without losing the core of one's identity. The first model is opposition. It operates on the premise that Christ holds sole authority over the believer's life, meaning human culture has no valid claim to their loyalty. This stance is often fueled by the belief that the end of the world is imminent. If all current institutions are about to face divine judgment, then participating in them is at best a distraction, and at worst an allegiance to evil. Followers of this model systematically shun the hallmarks of secular life, avoiding the realm of politics, rejecting worldly philosophy, shunning the military, and abandoning the arts to remain untainted by a fallen world. We see this historically in monasticism. The Trappist monks, for example, pursued total separation from society to focus their entire existence on Christ. Maintaining this distance required absolute vows, poverty, chastity, and a lifelong commitment to silence. Niebuhr argues that this position is a necessary starting point for theology. By refusing to bow to any human institution, it preserves the idea that a Christian's absolute loyalty is reserved for Christ alone, preventing the Church from becoming a mere tool of the state. Yet he also finds it sociologically inadequate. Humans are inherently cultural beings. We live in communities and use language, making a total escape from culture a practical impossibility. History shows that movements attempting to flee culture often end up controlling it. By the medieval period, the very monastic orders that sought isolation became the dominant institutions governing European art, architecture, and learning. Modern parallels exist in strict American fundamentalism or ultra-Orthodox Hasidic Judaism. Even as these groups reject the surrounding world, they inevitably create their own rigid microcultures with specific rules and traditions. Total opposition is an illusion. Those who attempt to destroy their ties to culture simply build a new, isolated one that remains subject to human flaws. The second model is synthesis. This view sees no tension between Christ and the world, treating the laws of the gospel and the laws of society as perfectly harmonious. Here, Jesus is viewed primarily as a moral guide. His teachings become a roadmap for human cooperation and the construction of a peaceful society, or shalom. This mindset anchored 18th century deism and later defined the classical liberal Protestantism of the 20th century. The Judson Memorial Church in New York provides a vivid historical example of this. In its services, traditional hymns were replaced by Disney songs, and the call to worship was led by athletic tumbling teams. Niebuhr acknowledges that this model allows believers to engage with the cultural despisers of religion on their own level, speaking the language of the intellectual elite. Niebuhr's critique focuses on the human origin of culture. Because societies are built by flawed individuals, they are inherently subject to sin, a reality that a perfectly assimilated church is no longer equipped to see. If every single cultural expression is simply affirmed as harmonious with God, the church completely loses its distinct moral vocabulary. Without a transcendent perspective, a church following the synthesis model has no theological ground from which to judge or condemn the atrocities of a regime like Nazi Germany. Total synthesis strips the gospel of its power to judge, turning faith into a validation of whatever society happens to value at the moment. Niebuhr's own allegiance lies in the middle ground, Christ and culture in tension. This model rejects both the isolation of the monastery and the total assimilation of liberalism. It operates on a paradox. While the natural world is a good creation of God, the human imposition of culture upon that world is often corrupted by evil. The resolving principle of this model is that all truth is God's truth. This mandates that Christians find and embrace truth in science, mathematics, and the arts, because God is the ultimate author of that truth, regardless of where it is found. St. Thomas Aquinas exemplified this by combining theology with worldly philosophy, using God-given reason to serve the culture in which he lived. This model offers no simple escape. It demands the daily work of reconciling divine grace with human effort in the real world. This tension is documented in the 2nd century letter to Diognetus. The text describes how early Christians followed local customs in food and dress while maintaining a different allegiance, living in their native lands, but as aliens. It captures a physical paradox. They are present in the flesh, but they do not live according to the flesh. The text concludes by comparing the church's role to the human soul. The soul is in the body, but it is not of the body. Christians are in the world, but not of the world. For Niebuhr, this means that obedience to Christ is not an abstract principle. It is rendered in everyday life, within the specific culture where God has placed the believer. The result is a life that neither flees culture nor blindly mimics it. It is the choice to accept the friction of dual citizenship, working within a society while remaining accountable to a kingdom that transcends it.